My classmate put down every girl to impress the boys. They picked one of those girls to be the prom queen instead. Meredith Crane transferred to our school freshman year and immediately declared herself different from other girls. She said it loud and often to anyone who would listen. She said she wasn't into drama like most girls. She said she didn't understand why girls were so fake and catty. She said she preferred hanging out with guys because they were more chill and straightforward. She said all of this while looking directly at whatever group of boys happened to be nearby. The boys ate it up. They thought Meredith was cool and laid back and refreshingly honest. They didn't see what the rest of us saw. They didn't notice that Meredith only said these things when they were watching. They didn't notice that every compliment she gave herself came with an insult to other girls. They didn't notice that Meredith wasn't rejecting drama. She was creating it and blaming everyone else. I first became a target in my sophomore year. I was in the same chemistry class as Meredith and a group of guys she was trying to impress. We were assigned a group project, and I ended up working with two of the boys she had been flirting with all semester. Meredith didn't like that. She started making comments about me whenever I was nearby. She would say things like, "I don't get why some girls try so hard with their makeup. It's kind of desperate." She would say, "I could never wear heels to school. I'm not that insecure about my height." She would say, "Imagine spending an hour on your hair every morning. Some of us have actual personalities." All of these comments were aimed at me. I wore makeup because I liked it. I wore heels because I liked them. I spent time on my hair because it made me feel good. But Meredith framed all of it as proof that I was shallow and fake while she was natural and real. The boys would laugh along with her. They thought she was just being funny. They didn't realize she was tearing me down to build herself up in their eyes. This went on for months. No matter what kind of girl you were, Meredith had a way to make you sound lesser than her. By junior year, the girls in our grade had an unspoken agreement. We avoided Meredith whenever possible. We didn't engage with her comments. We didn't try to defend ourselves because that just gave her more ammunition. We just stayed away and let her have her audience of boys who couldn't see through her act. But something started to shift that year. The boys began growing up. They started dating girls from our school and realizing that those girls weren't the dramatic monsters Meredith described. They started noticing that Meredith always had something negative to say about their girlfriends. They started feeling uncomfortable when Meredith would make comments about other girls right in front of them. One of the boys, Bennett, started dating my friend Lacey in March. Meredith immediately started making comments about how Lacey was high maintenance and probably only liked Bennett for his car. Bennett told Meredith that was rude. Meredith said she was just being honest and looking out for him. Bennett said he didn't ask for her opinion and walked away. That was the first crack. More followed. By senior year, Meredith's audience had shrunk considerably. The boys who used to laugh at her comments were now dating the girls she made fun of. They didn't think her observations were funny anymore. They thought she was mean. Meredith didn't understand what was happening. She kept doing the same things she had always done. She kept putting down other girls and calling herself one of the boys. But the boys weren't interested anymore. They had seen behind the curtain and they didn't like what they found. Then came prom season. Our school had a tradition where the senior class voted for prom king and queen. It wasn't a popularity contest exactly. People tended to vote for classmates who had been kind and positive and contributed something good to the school community. Meredith assumed she would win. She had spent 4 years cultivating friendships with the boys in our grade. She thought those friendships would translate into votes. She thought being one of the boys meant the boys would choose her. She announced her candidacy like it had already been decided. She told everyone she was definitely going to be prom queen because she had more guy friends than any other girl in our grade. She said the girls would probably vote against her out of jealousy, but the boys would carry her to victory. She said it like it was a compliment to herself and an insult to every other girl at the same time. The votes were cast 2 weeks before prom. The results were announced at a school assembly. When they called the name of the prom queen, it wasn't Meredith. It was Lacey. The same Lacey that Meredith had called high maintenance. The same Lacey who was dating Bennett. The same Lacey who had spent 4 years being kind to everyone, including the people Meredith tried to tear down. The auditorium erupted in applause. Not polite applause. Real, genuine, happy applause. People were cheering and clapping, and some of the girls were even crying. Lacey walked up to accept her crown, and she looked genuinely surprised. She thanked everyone and said she was honored, and that was it. No speech, no gloating, just grace. I looked at Meredith. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of me. Her face was completely blank. She didn't clap. She didn't move. She just sat there staring at the stage while 400 students celebrated around her. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not a happy smile. A tight, controlled smile. The kind you put on when you know people are watching and you refuse to let them see you crack. She turned to the boy sitting next to her, a guy named Keegan who was one of the last holdouts still in her orbit, and said something I couldn't hear over the noise. Whatever it was, Keegan didn't laugh. He just looked at the stage and clapped along with everyone else. After the assembly, the hallway was buzzing. Girls were hugging Lacey and taking pictures and telling her she deserved it. Boys were congratulating her and shaking Bennett's hand like he had accomplished something too. It was one of those rare school moments where almost everyone was genuinely happy for the same person. Meredith walked through the middle of all of it with her chin up and her bag over her shoulder like she was just passing through a scene that didn't concern her. She didn't congratulate Lacey. She didn't stop to talk to anyone. She just moved through the crowd like it was an inconvenience. I was standing by my locker when she passed me. She glanced in my direction and our eyes met for half a second. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said everything. It was the look of someone who had just realized the game she had been playing for 4 years had rules she didn't understand. The fallout started that afternoon. Meredith posted something online. It was long and vague, the way people write when they want to say something specific but don't want to name names. She wrote about how prom queen was just a popularity contest, and how she was glad she didn't win because it meant she wasn't fake enough to play those games. She wrote about how some people peaked in high school, and she was already focused on her future. She wrote about how the girls at our school were threatened by women who got along with men, and that the vote was proof of how insecure they all were. She tagged nobody, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. The comments were immediate. Some people agreed with her, mostly underclassmen who didn't know the full history. But the seniors, the people who had watched Meredith operate for 4 years, pushed back. One girl named Simone commented that maybe the vote wasn't about being threatened, and was actually about rewarding someone who had never put other girls down to make herself look better. Another girl named Tara wrote that she remembered Meredith Meredith calling her pathetic in front of 6 boys at a homecoming party because she had been excited about her dress. A boy named Drew commented that he used to think Meredith was funny until he realized she never actually said anything positive about anyone, and that wasn't humor. It was just cruelty with a punchline. The post became a thread. Girl after girl shared their Meredith story. The time she told a boy that his girlfriend was boring and he could do better. The time she said a girl's acne was probably from all the makeup she caked on. The time she told a group of guys that every girl on the cheerleading squad was only there because they liked the attention from the crowd and had no real talent. The time she mocked a girl's stutter during a presentation and then told the boys sitting near her that it was painful to listen to. The time she told a freshman that her backpack was childish and her shoes were embarrassing, and that if she wanted to survive high school she should probably start caring about how she presented herself. The freshman had gone home and cried, and her older brother had to convince her to come back to school the next day. I didn't know that story until I read it in that thread. There were so many stories I didn't know. Meredith's radius of damage was wider than any of us had realized because she operated in small moments, in comments that landed like paper cuts, individually minor, but collectively devastating. The time she said a girl's laugh was annoying in front of a boy that girl had a crush on. The girl stopped laughing in public for the rest of the semester. The time she told a boy that the girl who asked him to the Sadie Hawkins dance was desperate, and that everyone felt secondhand embarrassment for her. The boy said no. The girl found out why a week later and transferred schools at the end of the year. Nobody connected it to Meredith at the time. We connected it now. And then there was Reese. Reese, a quiet girl who most people didn't know very well, wrote 3 paragraphs about how Meredith's comment about her eating habits had triggered a 6-month relapse in her recovery from an eating disorder. She said Meredith had stared at her tray during lunch and said something about portion sizes and asked if she was really going to eat all of that. She said Meredith had framed it as concern, had said she was just worried, had made it sound like she was being a good friend. Reese said she hadn't eaten lunch in the cafeteria for the rest of that year. She said she had lost 11 pounds in 2 months and her parents had to pull her out of school for a week to stabilize her. She said she had never told anyone at school what caused the relapse because Meredith's comment had been so casual, so throwaway, that Reese thought maybe she was overreacting. She wasn't overreacting. The thread grew to over 200 comments. Some of the boys who had been part of Meredith's audience for years started commenting too, not to defend her, to apologize. Keegan wrote that he was sorry for laughing at things that weren't funny and that he had been too immature to see what was really happening. Bennett wrote that he wished he had said something sooner, but he hadn't fully understood what Meredith was doing until she started targeting Lacey. A boy named Andre wrote that Meredith had once told him his girlfriend was too clingy and that he had repeated it during an argument, and it nearly ended the relationship. He said he didn't realize until months later that Meredith had planted the thought deliberately because she wanted to hang out with him alone. Meredith deleted the post within 2 hours, but the screenshots had already spread to every group chat in the senior class. She posted nothing else for the rest of the week. At school she was quiet, not humble quiet, calculated quiet. The kind of quiet where someone is waiting for the storm to pass so they can try a different approach. She found that different approach the following Monday. She cornered Lacey by the water fountain outside the gym and told her she wanted to apologize. She said she knew she had been rude sometimes and she was working on it. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She said she actually thought Lacey deserved prom queen and she was happy for her. She said all of this in a hallway where at least a dozen people could hear. Lacey was polite. She thanked Meredith and said she appreciated the apology. Meredith walked away looking satisfied, like the chapter was closed. What Meredith didn't know was that Lacey came to me that afternoon and said the apology felt staged. She said Meredith had waited until the hallway was full before approaching her. She said Meredith had spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear. She said Meredith had even paused between sentences like she was waiting for people to register what she was saying. She said it didn't feel like an apology. It felt like reputation management. I asked Lacey what she had wanted to say back. Lacey thought about it for a moment and said nothing. She said there was nothing to say. She said Meredith wasn't apologizing to her. She was apologizing to the hallway. And the hallway didn't need an apology. Lacey was right. The apology was a performance. She had spent 4 years performing and this was just a different script. Instead of performing as the girl who was better than other girls, she was now performing as the girl who had grown and changed. Both acts required an audience. Both acts were about controlling how people saw her. The real Meredith, whoever that was, never showed up without a crowd to watch. Prom night arrived on a Saturday in May. The venue was a ballroom at a hotel downtown. The decorations were silver and blue. The music was loud. Everyone was dressed up and taking photos and doing all the things you do on a night that feels like it matters more than it probably does. Lacey looked beautiful. She wore a deep green dress that her grandmother had helped her alter from a vintage piece she found at an estate sale. Bennett wore a matching green tie and looked like he might pass out from nerves every time someone asked him to pose for a photo. They were crowned together on the dance floor. Lacey's crown was a simple silver tiara that the school reused every year. She wore it like it weighed nothing, because to her, it did. She wasn't there for the crown. She was there because 400 people had said, "We see you and we like who you are." Meredith came to prom. She wore a red dress that was objectively stunning. She had a date, a boy from another school who didn't know the history. She smiled and posed for photos at the entrance and looked like she was having a great time. But I watched her throughout the night because I couldn't help it. 4 years of being on the receiving end of her commentary had made me hyper aware of her movements. I noticed things. I noticed that she stayed on the edges of the room. Groups she approached would talk to her briefly and then find reasons to drift away. Someone would suddenly need to request a song. Someone would suddenly need to find their date. Someone would suddenly need to use the bathroom. The excuses were polite and they were constant. When Meredith tried to join a table where 3 boys she used to eat lunch with were sitting with their girlfriends, there was a brief pause when she walked up. Not hostile, just closed. The energy at the table shifted like a door being gently pulled shut. One of the boys said, "Hey Meredith," and then turned back to his girlfriend's conversation. Meredith stood behind his chair for about 10 seconds, realized nobody was going to pull up another chair or make room, and walked back to the dessert table where her date was eating a brownie and scrolling his phone. I noticed that when the slow songs played and couples filled the floor and the friend groups huddled together at their tables, Meredith and her date were standing in that same spot near the dessert table, alone. She checked her phone constantly constantly. She laughed too loudly at things her date said, the same way she used to laugh too loudly at things the boys said in class. Projecting, always project, looking around to see if anyone noticed how much fun she was having. Nobody noticed. When Lacey and Bennett had their spotlight dance as prom king and queen, Meredith watched from the back of the room with her arms crossed. Her date leaned over and said something to her, and she shook her head and looked away. I noticed that during the group photo for the entire senior class, Meredith positioned herself near the center of the back row, surrounded by boys she used to sit with at lunch. She put her arm around one of them and smiled wide. In the photo, you would think they were friends. In reality, not one of them had spoken to her all night. That photo is probably still on her wall somewhere, framed proof of friendships that didn't exist. At one point during the night, I went to the bathroom and Meredith was already in there. She was standing at the sink, not washing her hands, not fixing her makeup, just standing there with both palms flat on the counter, staring at herself in the mirror. She didn't hear me come in, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. I stood there for a moment and something unexpected happened. I felt sorry for her. Not the pitying kind of sorry, the tired kind. The kind where you look at someone who has been exhausting to deal with for years, and you realize they must be even more exhausted on the inside because maintaining an act that demanding takes everything you have, and eventually there's nothing left underneath. She had spent 4 years tearing down every girl around her to build a version of herself that boys would like, and now the boys didn't like that version either. And she was standing in a bathroom at prom, alone, staring at a mirror, and she didn't even know which version of herself was looking back. I left without saying anything. I went back to my table where my friends were laughing and stealing each other's desserts and arguing about which song the DJ should play next. I sat down, and Lacey grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor for a fast song, and we danced badly and didn't care. It was the best night of high school. Graduation was 3 weeks later. Meredith sat 6 seats away from me in the alphabetical lineup. She walked across the stage, took her diploma, and smiled for the camera. Her parents were there. Her little sister was there, holding a sign that said, "Congrats, Mir." From the outside, it looked like a normal graduation for a normal girl with a normal family. Nobody watching from the bleachers would know that the girl in the cap and gown had spent 4 years systematically tearing down every girl in her grade and had ended senior year more isolated than any of them. Senior awards were given out at a ceremony the week before commencement. These weren't academic awards. They were character awards, voted on by a combination of teachers and students. Lacey won the Community Leadership Award for organizing the school's first peer mentoring program for freshmen. She had built it from nothing junior year, recruited 30 volunteer mentors, and matched them with every incoming 9th grader who signed up. Simone won the Arts Recognition Award for directing the spring musical and designing sets that people said looked professional. Tara won the Athletic Achievement Award, not just for her stats, but for coaching middle school girls soccer on weekends without being asked or compensated. A boy named Andre, the same Andre who had apologized in the comment thread for letting Meredith influence his relationship, won the Sportsmanship Award for something he did at a basketball game, where he helped an opposing player who had been injured and rode with him to the hospital instead of finishing the game. Reese, the quiet girl who had shared her eating disorder story in the comment thread, won the Resilience Award. The principal didn't share why she was chosen, but by then most people had read what she wrote and understood what it meant. That one got a standing ovation that lasted so long the principal had to gently wave people back to their seats. Reese stood at the podium holding her plaque and said 2 sentences. She said, "Thank you for seeing me." She said it matters more than you know. Half the auditorium was crying. Meredith won nothing. She was nominated for nothing. 4 years, and she had left no positive mark on the school community that anyone could point to and say that mattered. She had friends who were boys, but she hadn't been a good friend to those boys. She had used them as an audience, and they had eventually figured that out. She had a loud presence, but presence isn't the same as contribution. She had spent 4 years being against something, against other girls, against drama, against fakeness, but she had never been for anything. And when the school looked for people to honor, they looked for people who had built something, not people who had only torn things down. Every girl who walked across that stage to collect an award had spent her time at this school making someone else's life a little better. Meredith had spent hers making sure no girl felt too comfortable being herself. I ran into Meredith once after graduation. It was August, the week before I left for college. I was at a coffee shop with Lacey and Tara, going over our packing lists and pretending we weren't terrified about leaving home. Lacey was going to a state school 3 hours north. Tara was going out east on her soccer scholarship. I was headed to the West Coast. We knew this was one of the last times we'd sit together like this for a while, so we were stretching it out, ordering second drinks and third refills and talking about nothing important because the important things were too big to say. Meredith walked in alone. She saw us immediately. There was a flicker of something on her face. Not hostility, not arrogance, something closer to recognition, like she was seeing something she hadn't understood until now. 3 girls sitting together in a coffee shop. 3 girls who had been friends for years. 3 girls who had supported each other and showed up for each other and never once felt the need to tear someone else down to prove that their friendship was real. It was the simplest thing in the world, and Meredith had never had it. She ordered her coffee and stood at the counter waiting for it. I thought she would leave without acknowledging us, but she didn't. She walked over to our table and stood there holding her cup with both hands. She looked at Lacey and said congratulations again on prom queen. Her voice was different, smaller, no performance, no audience of boys nearby to impress, just a girl standing in a coffee shop talking to 3 girls she had spent 4 years diminishing. Lacey said thank you. Tara didn't say anything. I didn't either. Meredith stood there for another second like she wanted to say something else. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She nodded once, turned around, and left. I watched her walk to her car through the window. She got in, sat there for a moment, and then drove away. Lacey took a sip of her coffee. Tara went back to her packing list. I stared at the door for another few seconds, then picked up my pen. We were all going to different schools in different states, and we had a lot to figure out before September. Meredith Crane wasn't part of that.